Good afternoon and welcome to NUFC Matters on a Saturday pre-match with me, Steve Great, and Lee Clark. How are you, Lee?
Good, Steve. Well, saying good, tinged with a little bit of sadness today with the news that's broken this morning of the real true Geordie legend, one of our own, World Cup winner, Big Jack Charlton. Obviously, ex-Newcastle United manager as well. I think he's gone on record as saying that was always his dream job. Obviously, him and his brother Bobby done the region proud to Ashington lads, becoming to be champions of the world in football. So, yeah, I think tinged with a little bit of sadness today, Steve, unfortunately. But when days like this happen, you just remember and you have a look back on what he achieved, because you take it for granted sometimes, and you see 773 appearances for Leeds United, one club man, the trophies he won for that football club in probably its most decorated time in its history, and then the success he had on the international stage both as a player, then reinventing the Republic of Ireland as a manager, and those major tournaments he got them to. And you hear the stories of the players who played for him and played with him. A great guy, and someone who I know very well. He lived up here in Northumberland, in the next village to me. So I've seen him on a regular basis. A few personal stories is from obviously that link. He probably owes us about 100 pints of Guinness, because whenever I bumped into him, he always used to say that he'd forgot his wallet again. But I was never any problem buying Jack a pint of his favourite Guinness and listening to his knowledge of the game. Also, I don't know if you know this, but in the early 90s, Jack was on the panel that used to decide who was the Barclays Young Eagle of the Month, which at the time I was, were recipient of on numerous occasions, and Jack would come onto the pitch at St James's Park before a home game to present us with that trophy. And when he took the Republic of Ireland job, he was trying to convince us to change my allegiances from playing for England to playing for the Republic of Ireland. And in hindsight, that's a regret that I should have done, because I stuck with England. I'd gone through all the levels. And then when it got to the final push, I only ever made it to the full England squad and never got the cap. Whereas with Jack, I could have potentially played in a World Cup and a Euro Championships. He was that determined. It was through my grandparents on my father's side. And, so that was probably one regret, really. The rules weren't as loose as they were now as well, because you can play for England under 21s or even for the full team in a friendly, but still then go and play for another country. But because I'd represented England under 21s in an international tournament, Euro Championships and in a World Cup, we couldn't change allegiance then as well. So that put that to bed. And then the final story is a real funny one. When I was a young schoolboy myself, and the apprentices at the time were asked to go up and clean the manager's house, who at the time was obviously Big Jack. And so me and Paul Stevenson were designated to clean the living room of Big Jack's sprawling house up here in the Northumberland. So the newspaper rack was just, had numerous newspapers in it. And as we pulled the newspapers out the rack, some sort of little coin flipped out, went across the room. We picked it up and took it across to the then gaffer and just said to him, "Gaffer, what? This just flew out the rack. We don't know what it is." And his exact words was, "Bloody hell, lads, that's me World Cup winners medal. I've been looking all over for that." So, lo and behold, me and Steve, I had something worth a right few quid in my hands, and we give it up.
I mean, so many great stories about Jack Charlton. I had the privilege of meeting him on more than one occasion, getting to know him. Malcolm Dix, the honorary vice president of Newcastle United, introduced him to me at a Sport Newcastle dinner many, many years ago. And we kept in touch. And, there's a couple of events which I had, some that he wanted to go to. He was as well as a football man, he was a boxing fan. He really wanted to meet Ricky Hatton. So I invited him along as my guest to the Lancastrian suite, and he came along that night, and he was in his element. He was, he wanted a photograph with him, and at the time we had Stephen Taylor and Peter Ramage were playing, two Geordie lads playing for Newcastle. They both wanted to come and meet him, so I put them on the same table as them, and they had a cracking night. Jack had a cracking night. He loved listening to the stories, and Ricky's a great after dinner speaker, and it was a great night. It was nice to be able to give him something back and give him the opportunity. And although Ricky was the star that night, I'm sure that Jack probably signed just as many autographs as Ricky did, because of the fact that he was, a 1966 World Cup winner, and of course, as you mentioned earlier, a former Newcastle manager. And last time I saw him, obviously, it's well publicised. He was having those, those battles with his health, and dementia had sadly set in, and he, always want to support things. I spoke to Patty's wife, and she said, well, if you can pay for a taxi, Steve, we'll come down and we'll come and support the Pavel Cup. And he got, Pat got him in the car, and they came down in a taxi, and they pulled up at Dunstan's ground. He was mobbed by kids and adults alike, and he signed everything. He was a little bit of a fluster. He wasn't 100% sure why he was there, but then when he came in, he got sat down, and had a place all ready for him in the clubhouse. And the beauty was that England were playing that day. So the Pavel Cup had been played out. We didn't want him standing there watching the match and etc. But he came down and he just watched the England match with the people who supported the Pavel Cup and with a lot of the Dunstan fans at the clubhouse. And it was a fantastic night. He came down. He had his photographs taken with a few of the lads, etc. The former manager, Billy Irwin, and that. And it was just a great night. But, that was the last time I saw him. And it was just, as always, smart as a dart, had his suit on, his pin badges, his tie. And, you know what I mean? He was, he was always very smart when I met him. And just an absolute gent and a legend. And just, I'm pleased that I got the opportunity to, to meet him as I did on more than one occasion,
I think that's the key, Steve. I think the fact that he's come down and he was so humble, and for what he'd achieved in the game, in every aspect, he's playing and managerial side, that wasn't a big thing for him. It was just the fact he came back to his roots, loved living in the countryside, because fishing and, all those type of, outdoor sports were what his love of his life. And he was just a fantastic guy. I mean, he's absolutely revered in Ireland and Dublin and all those. You go around there and they hear your Geordie accent, and they just mention, Big Jack straight away, and they become so friendly with you because of him. He's just a brilliant guy. I mean, I forgot one other story that I should tell you. Was obviously I was still a young player, schoolboy at the time, but I was part of the youth team setup. And what used to happen when Jack was manager, before they played games, the youth team would play against the first team to try and reenact the opposition on the game coming up on the Saturday. And it was the famous game at Loftus Road on the AstroTurf pitch. And when Chrissy scored 4 goals and it ended up 5-5, I remember going down to the game being 4-0 up at half time and then 5-3 up in injury time, but only Newcastle could do a 5-5. So what was happening was, during this practice match at the old Benwell training ground, the first team weren't getting a lot of joy against us youth team at the time. And Big Jack came on, the gaffer, and he had his brogues on and his cords and his barber jacket and his flat cap. And he said, roll me the ball, son, to one of the youth players. And he flicked it up with one touch. And he just volleyed it 50 yards straight over the top of our defence. And he said, that's the only effing ball that works on this pitch on Saturday. Now I'm away fishing. Stop wasting me time. And by the way, when the team done it, he was right, because Chris Waddle kept getting in, scored 4 goals. I remember going down to the game at Loftus Road. It was the most ridiculous game ever. You went from absolute elation, 4-0 up, to devastation in injury time, 5-5. And, it was just, he was just an inspirational man. As you say, he was so friendly with everyone. you loved being in his company. Actually, when you used to pester him about asking him about the stories about football, he seemed quite embarrassed to talk about it. He wanted to talk about other things, you know. He'd rather talk about, you know, you. So if I was in his company and I'd ask him something about his career, he tried to push it onto myself, really, rather than push the success he'd had down someone else's throat. But you just wanted to understand what he'd done in his career, and I think everyone who's from the region, young or old, are proud of him and his brother to have, you know, two of our own who are our World Cup winners. And yeah, a sad day, but one that we should be proud of and remember him. And as I put in my Instagram post, gone but never forgotten.
Yeah, 100%. And you talk about Ireland, and I know I've been across there on stag do's and football trips in the past, and you know, the rumours are true. You know, you go into some of these bars, and behind these bars there's a framed cheque signed by Jack Charlton. And apparently one of the things he used to do was, of course, when he was as successful as he was as Republic of Ireland manager, was he used to go in the bar, make out that he'd forgotten his cash, pull out a chequebook, buy the round for whoever was in. And of course, none of these people who owned the pubs would ever cash the cheque. So
that's right.
He was on free booze, and so was everybody else who was with him.
That's typical Jack. That's an absolute classic story, and I've got no doubt. I'm looking forward to listening to the many people who will be hitting the media in terms of the TV and the radio. People who are even closer to him than I was, who played alongside him, who played for him as senior players. I'm looking forward to hearing their stories and anecdotes about him, because I've got no doubt there'll be hundreds of those. And it brings a smile to your face to hear of all the positive and great stories, and all the positive way he touched so many people around the world, not just here in his homeland in the northeast. So, you know, as I said, he'll always be remembered. We'll never forget him. He's made this region proud.
I mean, two Geordie lads, of course, who he gave debuts to and who went on to do well at different levels were of course, Joe Allen, the centre forward, who went on to carve his name at Hartlepool. He's a legend down there, got a street named after him, good pal of both yours and mine. And of course, Paul Gascoigne, Gaza. A lot of people forget that it was Jack Charlton who actually discovered Gaza and gave him his opportunity at the first team in Newcastle, and he went on to become a legend himself.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that, you know, that shows the quality of the man. He's seen. I think Gaza always tells a story when Jack walked past him and says, "Oh, you fatty, you come to play for me." And I think Jack's seen past the ungainly physique Paul had at the time as he was in his late teens, and seen the ability and give him the confidence and put him in the side. And Paul then shone brightly. So I can imagine Paul will, you know, be out there sometime today in the media world, giving us some stories, and obviously thanking Jack, because as a player you always thank the man who gives you that opportunity. You know, many times we've been together, that Jim Smith will always be important to me. When obviously Jim passed away as well not too long ago, that was a sad day for me, because, you know, for someone, a manager like that, to stick, and I've known, because I've been in that position, to put a 17-year-old in the team is a lot of, you know, takes a lot of guts, and, you know, because it could fall flat on them. And so I've no doubt Paul he'll be deeply saddened as well, because he'd be so close. And I think it was that one Geordie to another relationship. Well, that's what I got the feel of whenever I met him and he presented us with Young Eagle of the Month awards. And we used to chat, and then obviously came on to us to try and get us to go and play for the Republic. He was trying to pull on me heartstrings from one Geordie to another, but we obviously couldn't get through the red tape, and I always had that little doubt. I was still hopeful about the England, but as I said, in hindsight, I wish I had took them up.
I know there's so many funny stories, and you know, we're hoping to get Joe Allen on at some point. I know at the moment we're locked down, and that he'd been looking after his dad quite a bit, who is a canny age himself, and he was, you know, so many stories. But one in particular that I'll always remember Joe telling on the after dinner circuit was, you know, Joe getting into the first team and Jack being the manager, and that first day going into the dressing room and, getting your peg and sitting down and essentially Jack coming in and, just naming the team. And, Jack had that, that Ashington way of speaking, and, quite an aggressive voice, you know what I mean? Loud and aggressive. And he names the team and, everyone's sitting there, eyes down, etc. And one of the players pipes up, Gaffer, you've named 12. And he goes, all right. I'm pretty sure it was Neil MacDonald. He goes, well, you're not playing. That's how we picked the team. Joe got named that day. He played number 9. I think it was Sheffield Wednesday at home, actually, and I think Joe scored. But, just hilarious. So many funny stories, and I'm not going to steal Joe's thunder because when we get him on, I'm sure he'll be able to tell quite a few others. It didn't quite work out for Jack as manager at Newcastle, and obviously you, as I say, you were just up and coming then. But can you remember those days? I was only in my second season as a supporter. It was the first season that I'd actually gone to the games on my own and with my mates rather than with my dad. But I just remember that a lot of people were weren't as happy with Jack as manager because of the football he was playing. He was, we'd gone from Arthur Cox and Kevin Keegan and Terry McDermott, Peter Beardsley and Chris Waddle to, this lovely attacking flowing football to, Jack saying it's long ball. Did you feel that around the club when you were a kid?
Yeah, listen, Jack had his certain way of playing. As I said, that day he was talking about going to QPR was a good example. And you were right. I think it's quite unique that it mirrors what Steve Bruce probably had to handle after Rafa, because Arthur Cox was held in such high esteem. He developed and produced a fantastically exciting winning team with the front three and Terry Mackin behind of, the front three, Kevin Keegan, Peter Beardsley, Chris Waddle. So we had those 4 players. Kevin obviously retired. Terry Mack couldn't come to agreement in terms of a new contract, so he moved on. So you lose 2 of your talisman, you lose 2 of your most influential and experienced players. And then obviously he's come up against the backdrop of the football that had been played. He played football in a different way. We went with, we brought big George Riley in, big Tony Cunningham, went with big strikers. Peter and Chris seemed to be playing a bit more with drone rules, really pushed out wide and stuck out. If you remember, though, the first 3 games, I think we went and won the first 3 and were top of the old First Division, which is now the Premier League then. So the start had been great. But then obviously, the way Peter and Chris wanted to play with a lot of freedom across the front line seemed to be from the terraces that was being a bit restrictive. But even though they were still positive in how they played because they were catching the attention of other clubs, i.e. Chris moves to Tottenham. Not long later, Peter, obviously a year or 2 down the line, goes on to Liverpool. That's probably was more down to their talent than anything else. So it was a tough period for him. I think it was probably one of them, and I can imagine now, I've had the experience of being a manager myself, that he was probably so desperate to do well, he probably tried too hard to be successful. Because we all know, and we've said it, and it was probably right then, and it's probably right since, that, the next one to win that major trophy, the first one since Joe Harvey, will be revered around the city, and the statue will be getting built immediately. So I think as a Geordie lad and someone with his affiliation to the area and to the club, through his uncle as well, Jackie Milburn, he probably tried too hard to be a success, and it turned out a little bit sour in the end, and he walked away from the club. But that will never ever take away from the fact that, and what he was as a person, how gracious he was. And he still spoke positively about the club, about the area, and his love for the area and the club never wavered, So he done it. He had a go. It probably didn't work out the way he wanted to, but as I said, there was probably those factors in it, that probably made it not be his time.
He might not have been a success at Newcastle, but as we've already alluded to, Republic of Ireland manager, he's an absolute legend. And I mean, you know, there'll be tears in the pints of Guinness across there today. There's no doubt about that. And it's funny because obviously there's been a lot of matches replayed on television with the lockdown, Lee, and there's been a couple of documentaries and stuff done on Italia 1990, and of course we all remember that because of England getting to the semi-final and Gaza's tears. But I remember watching this, and it wasn't specifically on Ireland, but it was covering the whole World Cup in general and focused a bit on Ireland. And I just remember being just as excited about them getting to that stage. Do you know what I mean? And
absolutely.
And it was you were willing them to win as well, because a lot of those players who played in the Irish team, of course, were all playing in the old First Division as well. So, of course, when England played Ireland, it was just like a First Division game, or what we call the Premier League now. So, yeah, I mean, it was just as emotional for us watching that. And of course, with Jackie being from the Northeast, we all wanted him to do well.
Without a doubt, Steve, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And you talk about success. He was very successful just down the road at Middlesbrough as a manager. He's very successful at Sheffield Wednesday as a manager. So, there's been more high points than low. And obviously we talk about his career, one club man, which is very difficult now, and what he achieved in his football playing days as well. And it always seemed to be as well that he was always seen as the not the poor relation, but the one in behind Sir Bobby, his brother. Yeah. Sir Bobby Charlton always seemed to grab more the limelight. And obviously that's probably down to the fact that he was more of an attacking player. It still happens now. Defenders don't get as much credit as the attacking players do, because they make they get the cream on the top when they score, or they make the final pass, whereas defenders sometimes goes under the radar, the hard work and the great work that they do to help you get positive results. So no, you're spot on. And I remember watching those tournaments, and it was like your second team, you want them. And I remember in the Euro Championships when they got drawn together, it was a real difficult game, ended 1-1. And it proved to be one of the toughest games that England had, because, as you said, it was just players from, it's like a club match, really. And it was played like a club match in terms of international football is completely different in terms of the intensity, the tempo it's played at in different ways. It's like a chess game in international level. But what was happening was this was played like an old First Division game, so it was all blood and thunder. So, no, nothing but great memories, mate. Really tough to see that news this morning, but I think, and what I'd like to say to everyone is, remember the good times, remember what he was about, and be proud of what he brought to us as Geordie people, him and his brother, to get to the pinnacle of, pinnacle of what he was playing in. Anything you do in any walk of life, if you get to the pinnacle, it's unbelievable achievement. And him and his brother as Geordies done that, and we're really proud of them.
Yeah, I mean, so many achievements. Of course, he was an OBE. He's had so many different plaudits thrown at him, as well as being, of course, the World Cup winner. Obviously, there was a lot of talk after his autobiography about him and his brother, having a bit of a fallout. But I think the last thing I remember of those two together was the BBC Sports Personality of the Year Awards, and it was lovely to see Bobby present them with the Lifetime Achievement Award. So nice to think that they did eventually make it up. We feel for Bobby, of course, we feel for Pat, and we feel for the three kids. But we just both felt it was right today to pay tribute to a Northeast legend.
Yeah, listen, my final point on that is he should have been knighted. All them guys should have been knighted, in my opinion. Yeah. I had the pleasure of being up and close with George Cohen for a long time, who's an ambassador of my old club at Fulham, and all those guys should have got knighthoods, and and I think it would have been right. But and as you say, hey, listen, we've all got siblings, brothers and sisters. We have the fallout. Theirs is obviously done in the public domain because they were high profile. But at the end of the day, you love one another and you look after one another. That was unique, their story. Two brothers to be World Cup winners. Two brothers at two separate huge clubs in England to be successful in their own right. And then obviously Sir Bobby going on to do great things as a director and ambassador of Manchester United. and Jack to go on and be successful in his managerial career. Kind of won't tire of reiterating, they've done us proud.
Yeah. Right, on to Newcastle United, mate. And we obviously played Man City. I don't think either of us were expecting to come back with a great deal from there, especially the form that Man City are in. They've lost the Premier League to Liverpool, not just lost it, they've been murdered this season, really, as far as the title chase is concerned. They've had to give them a round of applause onto the pitch. They then stuffed them 4-0. So we were never going to get an easy ride. Newcastle, of course, had their injury problems. Some players, of course, will have been rested because it's been quite intense. Was there anything positive we could take out of that game, Lee?
Probably the fact that we weren't on the end of the highest ever Premier League defeat, because at one stage I think that looked like it was going to happen.
Yeah.
For me, Steve, I get it. They're an unbelievable team. We've talked about them. I'm a massive admirer of the manager. He's my favourite. I got the chance to when he was Barcelona manager, be in his close proximity for 2 weeks. I went over to Barcelona to see him work, and he treated me unbelievably. And he's the one that stands out for me. Unbelievable players. They've organised and recruited a magnificent squad, and it just shows you how well Liverpool have done to win that title. Because when you see City play the way they do like that, it's always going to be tough. And but I just think when it comes to Manchester City, there's a fear factor. It's all right, yeah, you have to play what's called a low block, but in old terms, it's playing deeper, being a bit tighter, trying not to let them play through the lines. But we were so deep, we never got off the edge of our own box. Our midfield players were only about 10 yards outside our own box. Now, what I'm saying to you, if you're giving players time on the ball, even if it's in front of you, the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, David Silva, Phil Foden, even Rodri, or Mahrez is picking up in wide positions. When you give them players time on the ball, they're world class. They will find the right pass eventually to cut through you. And when you play like that and you get goal behind, what do? Do you start chasing in the game? Do you start opening up? So I just felt that, it was 5. Foden missed 2 terrific opportunities for him, because he's going to be absolutely top draw. In the years top draw, but he's only going to get better. They had other opportunities where Dubravka's made a couple of saves. So I just think that in the cup tie, especially the first half of the cup tie, we've played with a fear factor. And what you kind of do when you play against these teams is, when you win possession of that ball, you kind of give it away cheaply. We weren't even getting 2-3 passes in before we're giving the ball back to Manchester City. And if you keep giving them that ball back, they're going to hurt you. I mean, some of the possession stats was 83% to 17. Manchester City, 93.7% success pass rate, which is a Premier League record. So that's going to tell you. The good thing was, and hopefully for today's game at Watford, and I've been looking closely on the footage, certainly Almiron will be a start. I would have thought he wasn't deemed fit enough to start, but was on the bench. Alan St-Maxim looks like he's going to return. I didn't see any footage of Lascelles, to be honest, and any footage of Andy Carroll during the training sessions. So whether they're just going to not train and be involved in the game, remains to be seen. But at least we have the 2 potent attacking threats that we need at the top end of the pitch to give us a chance, because, this has got the makings of a tough game. I know Nigel very well. I've worked with him closely, and the coaching team at Newcastle. He's very well organised, has a great rapport with his players. They've come off the back of, I know it was against just Norwich, who looked like they could get relegated today, but any win in the Premier League gives you players positivity. They have some outstanding individuals. So it could be a tough game. And what we don't want what's been the feel-good factor to be spoilt in the last few games, because there's still the chance of getting in the top 10. There's still the chance of having the highest points total in the last 12, 13, 14 years, which isn't, something to get excited about, but it's a stat. It's just a damning stat to say where we've been in those 13, 14 years, I've seen some comments, and I listened to the commentary when I watched the game as well. old teammate of mine in England at 21, Steve McManaman. And then I seen some comments after the game from certain sections of the fans who were getting a bit frustrated with how we're getting portrayed in the media, how things it's been a successful season, and it's been this, it's been that, and some of the points I agreed with. And I've said this to you many times. This club and our club should never be judged and should never deem success of just staying in the Premier League or finishing just below mid-table. We should be aiming to get back into that top 10, then trying to fight for Europe, and then trying to be competitive for the major trophies. And I know, listen, the game's changed and the top teams are, like I've said to you about when we first talked about the takeover, it's going to take a long time to catch up those teams because they're so far ahead. You judge the quality of a group by what they've got on the bench, and you see what Liverpool and Manchester City and Chelsea can bring off their benches in comparison to ourselves. We had 2 or 3 untried youngsters on the bench against Manchester City. Now, do we put those on at 4 or 5-0? And, it becomes one of the hardest things ever done, and it knocks their confidence. I think Steve was probably right in not putting them on at that stage of the game. We don't affect the youngsters' confidence so quickly. So, yeah, I thought I was disappointed, with how the players performed. It was always going to be difficult, that top class, but hopefully it can be put right this afternoon.
Steve Bruce came out in his press conference, and again, he's constantly asked about the takeover, and he essentially just said we needed a decision, and we needed it weeks ago. Really, he said it's hanging over us, and then he turned it onto the press. Really, he just says, "Why don't you guys get stuck into the Premier League, get stuck into them, and demand a decision that will give us a bit of clarity?" Essentially saying that we can't influence the takeover, but there has to be clarity in the decision. And he was also saying, like the media and the papers have been saying it's going to happen for the last 15 weeks. So there was a bit of frustration from Steve Bruce because, of course, he's in the managerial position at the minute, and all of this uncertainty certainly isn't going to help us if the takeover doesn't go through for the next few weeks, and he's got to start making plans for next season.
100%, Steve. I think Steve Bruce is in a very, very awkward position. I know through his professionalism, he'll just be cracking on with the job. He'll be looking at the games, trying to get as many points as he can from the remaining number of games. But he also have his recruitment team ready, and himself understanding the positions he wants to strengthen, the type of players he wants to bring in. But I think the bit of frustration's creeping in by him now because he doesn't know. There's too much uncertainty. It's dragged on for a long time. Becomes the main story. He knows it frustrates the fans, and sometimes that can relay itself onto the pitch, even though there's no supporters there. You still have, the social media, which can affect the players and management, etc. So I think he's right in saying about getting it clarified one way or the other. So the club, so he actually knows with clarity, one, if it's just going to be carry on as normal under Mike Ashley in the current regime, and he'll have his recruitment plan for that. 2, is he going to be the choice of the new owners? And if he is, obviously probably looking at it a more substantial budget, so a different type of player that he can go for. And there's not long before the new season starts. I was just looking at the 12th of September they're talking about, the weekend. So they finish, last weekend in July. So you're talking 7 weeks, I think it was, from the last game to the next one. Now, it's how he works about the players, giving them a little bit of a rest and a mental break before the new season starts. You kind of give them too long because you don't want them to come back in the new season unfit, because you get off to a bad start and it's very difficult to recover. And also what he's got to do in that short period of time is strengthen the squad. I seen a report today saying that he was looking to bring in at least 4 new signings. So, we know at the level that Newcastle are competing at the moment in time, and with the budgetary restrictions, that could be difficult to get 4 players over the line, even if they're going to be permanent signings. So I can imagine he is getting a bit frustrated with the timescale, and when you mentioned how long it's been, 15 weeks, did you say? wow, that's a long time for a takeover process. And I know we've had issues like we've never experienced before in the world, but that's still a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the PR that's coming out of the club at the minute, obviously because there's football, we're getting stuff now from the club, and Steve Bruce is always going to be the spokesperson, because of course we don't hear anything from Mike Ashley and Lee Charnley. But there seems to be a lot of stuff coming out about, I've seen that report about, potentially getting 3 or 4 players in. Steve Bruce came out and compared Newcastle's situation to Aston Villa's. He said, they spent 145 million and they're in the bottom 2. It's not always about the money. I saw another quote, I think it was in an article by Andrew Musgrove at the Chronicle as well, where he just said that the club isn't stagnating. That kind of talk isn't really going to go well with Newcastle fans, because Newcastle fans don't want Mike Ashley in charge of the football club. They want him out of the club, and they want the club to progress, because ultimately, you've admitted it there, like earlier on, finishing safe and not getting relegated shouldn't be an achievement for a club like Newcastle United.
That's been my biggest gripe over the last decade. The celebrations because we finished 4th or 5th bottom. It's really frustrated us and disappointed us, and but when you have that from the top, that's all you're going to try and achieve. And, when that's your aim, you fall under that. And that's why we've had 2 relegations. And it's, you're spot on when you mention the situation with Villa. That was quoted. My old club, Fulham, done the same the previous year. They both spent over 100 million. I mean, you talked about this at the start of the takeover. It's all right having crazy amounts of money, but there's lots of examples of teams having that and spending it in the wrong way. You can put our record signing in that, who I thought was disappointing again the other night in a very tough game, but offered nothing. Here's a man who smashed our transfer record by more than double, and isn't worthy of his place in the starting 11 for me at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt. And so it's all right having funds. It's doing the right things with it, and if you do it right, they don't always have to be costly. Look at our best player, our most exciting player, Alan St-Maxim. Wasn't what you'd consider to be a big buy in today's market. In fact, very, very cheap. Martin Dubravka, he has made the odd error, but when keepers make an error, it usually ends up in the goal. So that's unfortunate. But he's still been an outstanding signing. Whatever he cost with, between £4.5 and £5.5 million, one of the steals of Premier League history. So there's still bargains out there in terms of doing it right. It's getting your recruitment right, not wasting that money and thinking, because we've spent 150 million, we're going to be all right. Because there's 2 huge examples just from this season. That one Villa looked like they're going to go down, and Fulham, who did go down the previous year. Yeah.
I mean, it's money doesn't buy you everything. We know that in football, but it does help if you've got some. So we'll watch that with interest. Obviously, it's coming towards the end of the delayed season, and we're going to be bang in the middle of transfer window talk, and it's already starting. Of course, Almiron being linked, and his dad saying that he's not going anywhere, and some Maximum being linked to PSG. I think the most bizarre one I've seen, Lee, is John Joe Shelvey. I think it was John Giles, former
Johnny Giles, yeah.
He suggested that Pep Guardiola takes a gamble on him and takes him to Man City. What did you make of that?
Well, when I seen that and I dissected it, I understood what John Giles was saying, because me and you have talked about in terms of the talent. John Joe Shelvey has terrific talent. He has a great range of passing. And what he's done, he seemed to add a lot of maturity to his game in the last few months, and he's added more goals. I think, is he the top league goal scorer for Newcastle? Yeah. Or he's near the top. And so that's a great return for a central midfield player. We know his ability, but I think Steve's given him a lot of leadership in terms of making him captain, makes him feel like one of the senior members of the squad. And I think John Joe's, returned that. I think what Johnny Giles was on about, he has the ability to play for a Man City. And don't forget, he'd signed for Liverpool when he was a youngster. So that tells you in itself he has the ability. What he has to do is be consistent. What he has to do is bring that defensive side of the game, because we just talked about some of the outstanding attacking players Man City have, but those players I mentioned, the Fodens, the De Bruynes, the David Silvas, I watch them when they haven't got the ball, how hard they work, where they are positionally, they're tracking back, they're winning the ball back on their edge of their own box. As soon as they lose it, they're the first one to press. So, John Joe has to see that. When you look around the world and you've looked around, football in time, the top players, the best players are the ones who have the ability, but they work unbelievably hard. Take Kevin Keegan, for example, Ballon d'Or winner 2 years in a row. And when I was fortunate to play for him, and I used to speak to him regularly, he always said he made himself into that player. He didn't have the natural ability. He worked unbelievably hard. Every day he worked hard on his finishing, his heading finishing, his shooting finishing. Every day he worked hard on his movement. Every day he worked hard in the gym to get himself stronger. He said when he moved to Hamburg, he gained 4 or 5 kilos in solid weight and had an unbelievable physique what he'd never had. So he made himself, and not only was he a top player, I think he undervalued himself a little bit, saying he didn't have the natural ability, but he hadn't the natural ability, but he ended up being an unbelievable worker as well. And all those players over time who have ended up being classed as, legends of their era, work hard. Shearer, no one worked harder, pressing the back four of the opponent, making run after run to move centre halves out the way. Lots of movement in the box to get across defenders. Done great shifts when the team was under the cosh, coming back to defend corners. All those type of things. The stuff that sometimes gets unseen, and I think that's what John Giles was saying. That it's certainly the natural talent John Joe has. It's the other parts of the game that he can add on a more consistent basis.
Well, there was reports as well on Fabian Schär this week, talk about his contract. He's got a year left. I don't think he's looking to sign a new deal. Is that somebody who you'd like to see stay? I mean, he played in an unfamiliar central midfield role, against Man City. Obviously, that was just down to the fact that we had so many players unavailable. But, are you a Fabian Schär fan?
Of course, I think for the money that he cost, another one that didn't cost the earth, and he's popped up with some really important goals. I think he has a good distribution in terms of his range of passing. He's hit some long range strikes for us. Very difficult, as me and you said, when we're talking about him being a square peg in a round hole. Very difficult to do that against the top draw midfield of Manchester City's. So it was always going to come unstuck. And I think when you have a player like that who has that versatility, it is important to have those players in your squad as well. When you're carrying such a small squad who can cover, he can play in the back two with centre halves. He can play in the back three with centre halves. He could do that defensive midfield role. Obviously, struggles against the top teams doing it, but when you come up against other teams in the league, could possibly do that. So, yeah, I'd like to see those type of players stay. If a takeover happens, whether they'd be a regular in the starting 11 remains to be seen, but certainly would give you that flexibility in terms of a squad player.
Now, I saw somebody else in the news this week. You kept this one quiet. Newcastle Blue Star. You're back in football. What's going on?
Yeah, completely different role, Steve, and something that is exciting for us, something that I've been looking to be doing for a while. Know Stephen Best, the chairman there, really well, and the committee have terrific ambitions for the club in terms of there's redevelopment of the ground going on as we speak, in terms of 2 new covered seating areas, one of the main stand with the new dressing rooms for home and away, manager's office, physio's office, hospitality for over 250 people with a lookout onto the pitch, and also from behind the stands where one of the mini soccer pitches is going to be, VIP areas, potential down the line of 4G floodlit full size area, other sporting facilities for the community in the area. And also my remit is the general one of the director football role is, 1, helping with that redevelopment, 2, bringing sponsorship into the club. 3, overseeing the academy, which is at a very young age in terms of the club was only reset up in 2018. So overseeing that. No interest in being a manager. Kenny's done a great job, Kenny Wharton and his staff. So I said to the committee that not even for one day would I be interested in being the manager. This is something I've thought about for a while, because I know and I understand how to develop players. Because of my time at Birmingham, when I was basically running the club financially and from a football standpoint, I know what it takes to, budgetary terms. I basically, with the academy director, done the audit to get the club into Category 2 status, which was really good for the financial position it was in and being in the Championship. So the running of the academy and setting out a philosophy. And what detracted is more than anything, because I've been nagging this for a while since I've been out of football, was the ambition of the people. The ambition of the people at the top. And that's what you've got to be sometimes, and when they're lucky enough to also have the finances to back that, you've got an opportunity, and what they want to try and build something where they are at the moment. Yeah, it could take a while, but probably the people at South Shields said the same. Probably the people at Salford City said the same. So there's dreams can be made if you do it right, and they have the people at the very, very, very top, the owners and the committee, who have the ambition, but don't just talk about ambition, they deliver. And so I'm going to meet all the coaches and staff after this chat with you, and really looking forward to getting stuck into many different aspects of football. And it adds different strings to my board, gives me more experience on different things. And it also gives us an opportunity to add something back. And what really excited Steve, which you'll understand, was with it being Newcastle Blue Star, the kits from our black and white home kit with a blue star on, and then the second kit being the blue strip with a blue star on. But the third one, the iconic silver one with the blue star one, which was obviously, I remember Newcastle wearing down at Craven Cottage under McKeegan and Beardsley when Peter scored an overhead kick in a 2-2 draw. So that brought a little bit, that pulled at the heartstrings a little bit as well, because you have that little bit of nostalgia with the olden days at Newcastle United.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that, mate, because having you involved in a football club is massive for people, but especially with it being in the northeast, and I'm sure you'll take a lot to them and do really well, mate. So good luck with that.
Yeah, listen, it's me trying to help, and what we want to try and do is give the youngsters somewhere to come every day, give the youngsters a project, help them if we can to try and live the dream like I did and make a living from the world of football. And if we can, we want to help them in their life going forward as well. So, there's lots of possibilities. So, but we really appreciate your good wishes.
I've got to ask you about VAR, mate. We haven't really discussed it a great deal, to be honest, over the lockdown period. But is that possibly the worst night of VAR the other night? I think every game had a decision which was wrong. I think I've never seen anything like it.
I think they come out and said there was 3 major decisions that they got wrong, but why the refs not going across to the monitor to make their own minds up as well? I mean, it's just I can't fathom it out. I mean, you have the Harry Kane incident with Tottenham. It's a penalty all day long. For me, the Fernandez one isn't a penalty. The Tarkowski one, if the Eddie Nikita is a straight red the night before, the Tarkowski one's a straight red. The inconsistencies is actually getting worse with VAR. It's not getting used for the right reasons, and it's actually it makes it worse, because not only are the referees not being allowed to use common sense, the VAR, who are looking at these decisions and getting it wrong after watching numerous different replays, slowing it down, and they're still coming to the wrong conclusion. It must be heartbreaking. It must be so frustrating as the managers who are on the end of these decisions. They must be absolutely pulling their hair out, and you're just in the lap of the gods again, aren't you? We thought this was going to bring an end of all this, but it's actually it's made it worse. it's made it worse.
Yeah, it has. I mean, it is farcical. They really need to look at it, I think. And, you know, the worst thing about it, and I'll always say this, I mean, look, the league's done and dusted, but the relegation end, it isn't. And you know,
Absolutely.
one of these decisions could cost a club millions if you know, it could be down to that 1 point, or, you know, the penalty that they don't get, or the goal that's, you know, that supposedly was a handball or someone was offside. It's crazy, and you know, they really do need to get the system right. I just don't think they practiced enough with it. They did, you know, it wasn't given enough testing, and you know, we've seen some absolutely disastrous decisions. And the only thing that happens is managers come out, they can't say a great deal. You know, Jose Mourinho tried his best, but he'll still end up on an FA charge for criticising the referee and criticising VAR, and you know that, you know, the FA make more money out of it, don't they?
Well, Steve, that's the problem. You know, the managers are so very nervous about speaking the truth now. They just fudge the questions, and you know, they get criticised for that. But why are you going to come out and say something, and then, you know, 50% of your weekly salary gets taken off you because you get fined?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The money that you're working for your family, because you come out and tell the truth, and you get you get fined for it. You know, and charged by the Premier League and the FA. So you don't get the true reflection of the managers either, because they can't feel like they can be honest with it. And nobody from the Premier League or the Referees Association come out. So you just have this debate, and it's only the pundits and us, the supporters, who can talk about it.
Yeah. Exactly, mate. Exactly. Well, we've mentioned today's game already. Watford away. Watford, of course, are still embroiled in the relegation battle. Newcastle, of course, now mathematically safe. Injuries, we've talked a little bit about it. Kieran Clark and Florian Lejeune both still sidelined. Clark probably will miss the rest of the season. Lejeune could come back for maybe the last game or two. Other injuries today: Isaac Hayden and Sean Longstaff aren't expected to play again this season. Andy Carroll's got a groin strain, and Emil Kraft's got an unspecified issue. So, as you quite rightly mentioned earlier, though, Lascelles, Almiron and St Maximin should all return to the starting 11. So Watford away isn't a happy hunting ground. We've never beaten them there in the Premier League, which, you know, is, you know, no surprise. Our away form has never really been great. Although last season, with a good number 9, it has to be said, Rondon, we did manage to get a 1-1 draw. So how do you see today's game going, Lee, and what's your prediction?
I see it as a very tough game, Steve. I see, because as I spoke about, I know the manager really well. I believe they have some talented players. They're fighting, you know, to stay in the Premier League. If they can take maximum points, that would give them a decent bit of breathing space. I think it might take them 4 or even 5 points clear if results were to go for them. So very difficult. Difficult when you mention that we are without, you know, Sean and Longstaff and Hayden, you know, who've done well since the project restart, in terms of when we've had the positive results. Andy, as we've mentioned, you know, was another setback for him, which is, you know, the elephant in the room all the time with these continuation of injuries, which is, you know, always going to put what he can do in doubt for us. So, you know, it leaves you with the conundrum: do you go with Dwight Gale through the middle, you know, who in the last away game at Bournemouth, in the obviously last win, looked impressive and will be full of confidence, with Almiron and St Maximin either side, and obviously you're hoping that Lascelles can come back, because obviously our captain's an important leader in many aspects, not just for the way he plays, how he leads the group. So, and as we've said, Newcastle haven't got such a big, strong squad in depth. They need as many of their experienced lads back as possible. So I think an extremely difficult game. Hopefully they respond the way they have in previous times where they've had a disappointing result. Mm-hmm. Because if they follow on where they left off in midweek, it could be a very tough afternoon. But I'm expecting a tight game. So I think you could either look at a score draw, but if not, I'll go with a positive one and say that we'll win by the odd goal, probably 2-1.
I've gone for 2-2, mate. So yeah, let's hope we get something down there. It would be nice to get back on track, if you like, and yeah, it would be good from a psychological point of view just to get more points than we've ever had under this Ashley regime. It would be nice. It would be good for Steve Bruce as well. So let's see how things pan out. As always, mate, great. Good luck at Blue Star today, mate, and we will catch up next week.
Cheers, Steve. Thanks very much.
Take care, mate. Bye bye.